Networking and marketing made simple is for you, the business owner who has a product, a service, or a message that you believe in. My name is Scott Aaron, and each week we'll take a behind-the-scenes look into the real-world marketing and networking tactics and strategies for getting what you have in front of you to a lot more people. Thanks for spending time with me, and now let's get started. So Margy, welcome to today's episode. And guys, I'm really excited about this one for a number of reasons. Number one, we ended up connecting on my favorite platform, LinkedIn. And number two, what Margy and her company and her business partner, what they do is they help people leverage themselves and their businesses through the power of podcasting. Now, for those of you that have been following my podcast for the last year and a half, and I'm rapidly approaching 100,000 downloads, which is really exciting. The bigger thing of that is that people truly don't understand the power and the potential of what a podcast does. But before we get into all of that, Margy, thank you so much for being here today, number one. Number two, for my audience that is not familiar with you or your company's work, let's talk about that for a brief moment. But more importantly, I love starting the podcast off this way, is sharing your entrepreneurial moment. What was that moment for you where that entrepreneurial spark was lit and it hasn't gone out since?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Scott. So I am the co-owner, as you said, of Interview Connections. We are the leading guest booking agency. We have been doing this since 2013, which is not old for a business, but for a business in the podcasting space, it is pretty old because it's such a new medium. We book successful entrepreneurs as guests on other people's podcasts so that they can grow their personal brand and get more clients. So it's a great opportunity if you don't have your own podcast to still leverage the power of podcasting. My entrepreneurial moment, I love that you asked that. So I had sort of a unique business journey because I am not the founder of Interview Connections. I'm 50% co-owner, but I didn't found the business. So I have sort of a unique journey into being an entrepreneur. And I would say my moment, and actually this ties back to network marketing, which I know is something, an interest we both shared that we talked about on a previous call. My entrepreneurial moment was I had just gotten back from Taiwan. I was living there as an English teacher. My dad had just died suddenly. And I was on my phone between cleaning up his house. I was taking a break. And I saw a post from a network marketer, and it was one of those posts where they were sitting in their bed, they're gorgeous king size bed, everything's perfectly Instagram and beautiful. And they've got their cup of coffee and their laptop. And they were like, I just love that I can earn 6 and 7 figures working from my bed at home. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want. That's what I want. And that really was the beginning of, wow, I could do things differently. I don't need to go to an office. I don't need to be an employee. So that was the spark. And then there was a lot more that happened to get me to the point of co-owning this business. But I would have to say that moment in my mom's living room, looking at that post on Facebook, was the beginning.
So let's talk about something really quickly. What is it about Interview Connections? Because again, there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there right now that are, they're distributing their skills and things that they don't want to do. And they're hiring agencies to help them clear some things off their plate. And I get messages all the time from VAs that are looking to have their person booked on my podcast. And again, for me, there's a right and a wrong way to do it. So if someone was to ask Margy, what makes Interview Connections so different than all of these VAs that you can hire on other platforms to help get you on podcasts? What would you say are the differentiating factors that really make you guys different?
That's a great question. I would have to start with just the infrastructure of our business because we've been doing this for 7 years and we are so niche down. This is all we do and all we have done for 7 years. So we really, we eat, sleep, and breathe podcast booking, and we have 7 years of connections. So anyone who works with us is leveraging the connections we've built over 7 years with all these incredible podcast hosts, which obviously makes it much easier to get a yes when you do get that pitch. We have full-time employees. We don't use contractors all over the world or all over the country to represent our clients. We have employees so that we can train them, we can develop them, and we can make sure that our clients are getting the best possible service. So we know how they're being trained. We're constantly developing them so that when they are pitching their clients, they're experts at finding which shows are going to be the best fit for that client's goals and getting in front of their target audience, and then reaching out to those hosts in a way that gets a yes. Because as you said, there is definitely a right way and a wrong way to pitch. And sending a bad pitch, there really are consequences to your reputation when you do that or when someone does that on your behalf.
So, the other thing is there's a lot of people, I would say, they don't feel worthy enough to have a podcast. Who am I to start a podcast? What message do I even have? Who's going to listen to what I have to say? So what's your message to that network marketer, that entrepreneur that is trying to convince themselves that they are not worthy enough to have a podcast?
There's definitely a huge mindset aspect because getting your voice out there is hard. It's scary. And even though, it's virtual and you're kind of hiding behind a microphone, it's less nerve-wracking, I would say, than speaking on a stage. But it still is nerve-wracking, and it takes some mindset and it takes a lot of practice as well. And I would say to those people, you shouldn't start a podcast unless you have a lot of conviction, because it's so much work to, as you know, to have a really good podcast, to stay consistent with it, to grow your audience, to not quit. I mean, we see so many shows that pod fade, as we call it, that, they start with all the best intentions, but they're not committed enough that, when life gets busy, they just drop the podcast. So I would say if you're on the fence about starting a show and whether you should, I would go the route of guesting on other people's shows first. And that will help you get the lay of the land, work on your own messaging, experience different types of formats on different shows. And that's an amazing foundation to start a show in the future. And we find that a lot of our clients who we book as guests on other people's shows, after about a year of working with us, they'll start their own show as well, because then they really get into it and they're excited to start their show. And that's the place you want to start a show from.
If you had to kind of put your finger on some of the major benefits of having a podcast right now, with all the craziness that's gone on in 2020, what would you say the main benefits are to having a podcast right now, whether you're a network marketer, entrepreneur, or not?
I think with everything going on, people need leadership, and people are really noticing who's getting quiet and who's stepping forward. And the people who are speaking on podcasts, whether it's as a guest or hosting their own show, who are staying consistent, who are standing up and speaking, that is leadership right now. Virtual speaking is leadership right now. And people are noticing. And I think it's so important to be out there for your target audience and serving your people through this chaos, because they need you more than ever.
It's one of those things I never intended on having a podcast. I remember kind of just thinking about it one day, what's another way that I can really engage with my audience? How can I empower them in a different way where I can start building that know, like, and trust with them? Because again, there's so much information out there, Margy. There's so many podcasts to listen to. There's so many things to download. It can get really overwhelming for people. But I think for the podcasters that are even listening to this, or the people that have always dreamt and thought about starting their own podcast, it's so important to understand that a podcast doesn't just represent you. It represents your brand, and your brand is whether you're a network marketing or not. Don't forget, your network marketing company, they own your downline, they own your back office, they own your distributors, they own your customers, they own the website that you've built through them, they own that. But the one thing that they can't own is your brand. And having something like a podcast is a whole other revenue stream that you don't even have to pump that much money into it, because once it starts falling on the right ears, and human beings do what human beings do, which is tell other people, hey, you need to check this out. But just like you said, there are so many people that start a podcast and they realize the inner workings of what it takes to have a successful podcast, which is only really one thing: consistency. It's not about having, the flashiest audio. I mean, here's the thing. When I started my podcast, I host it through a platform called Anchor. It was an app I downloaded on my phone, where I recorded all my episodes on my phone and then published them to the 9 streaming platforms. Now I got a little bit more fancy, and I have a microphone, and I have headphones, and I have those things to up the quality. But you have to learn as you go. And I didn't know any of that, but obviously I know that now. And people don't understand. The other thing is this: when you can build the right kind of presence through a genuine, authentic message that you can have on your podcast, it becomes a lead generation tool, because people start to know you, they like you, they trust you, all of those things. So let's go to the misconceptions now, Margy. What are the misconceptions about podcasting that people may not know about?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that people look at podcasting as if it's traditional media, and they put too much importance on the numbers, because yes, you definitely want to grow your audience, but the magic of podcast audiences is that they are so concentrated and they're so specific. So they're so valuable even when they're not a huge audience. And as you said, the know, like, and trust factor is so high from someone who's actively listening to your voice, listening in on your conversations. They feel like they know you. They feel like they're eavesdropping on your conversations. It's so incredibly valuable. So the biggest mistake we see people make is that they think with either hosting a show or being a guest on other shows, that if there's not, hundreds of thousands of people downloading every episode, that it's not a good use of their time. And then because of that, they either don't start or they stop, and they lose that consistency, which, as you said, you're totally right. With guesting on other people's shows and having your own podcast, consistency is the main thing that you need. You will develop all the other skills as you go, but it's sticking with it that is the number one differentiator we see between people who have huge success with it and people who don't.
Right now, I was actually tracking the numbers where I am right now with my podcast, and I get anywhere between 1,200 to 1,500 downloads every single almost no. I'm getting about almost 2,500 to 4,000 downloads a month. And it wasn't always like that. When I remember when I started my podcast, I remember when I published the first episode, I was like, oh my God, Nancy, 10 people listened to my episode. And then you start doing more episodes and you're like, average audience, 25 people, then 50. And I remember when my audience grew to 100 people per episode, I'm like, oh my God, 100 people are listening to my podcast every episode. And what people don't understand, like right now, my podcast is actually listened to in 87 countries around the world, which is also amazing because there's this website called Chartable where you can basically see how successful your podcast is. And I was looking at it, and the US market is a very competitive place, but my podcast is actually, I think it was top 50 in 3 different markets. I think it was Hong Kong, South Korea, and I think New Zealand or Australia, one of those 2. And you don't even realize the scope and the magnitude of what you're able to accomplish when you just, and that's the thing, the only way to fail is to quit. If you're expecting to do a podcast and then launch it and then it explodes, it's not going to happen overnight. Now, people that have big networks that launch a podcast, again, that's a whole separate conversation. I think I checked the other day, and I have 60 5-star ratings and reviews on my podcast on iTunes. And I haven't messaged people to do that. I have a call to action in my podcast, but those are 60 genuine people that were so inspired and motivated by what they learned in one of those episodes. They took that action and they said, thank you. And here's the recommendation. When you are building your brand and your presence, that's why a podcast is so amazing, because it allows the audience, Emily Goff, she's a podcast coach, good friend of mine. I had her on my podcast earlier this year, and she said something pretty amazing. She said, what people don't understand about podcasting, she said it's one of the most intimate experiences that a person could have, because you're directly talking into someone's most valuable place, which is the 6 inches between their ears. It's when people are driving to work or coming back home or in the house, obviously, with most of us are right now. But the fact of the matter is that's such an intimate experience for someone. They get to know you as a person. So if you had to talk about, and this is something that I love people sharing, when you came into the business, obviously after it was created and obviously co-owning now, because entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs, whether you're doing what you're doing or doing what I'm doing, we're all doing something. What was the biggest obstacle that you guys had to face and overcome in growing your business and your brand?
The biggest obstacle was when we got to a certain level, realizing that we had to make a lot of big changes to get to the next level, because Interview Connections was a contractor run business. Basically, every member of the team was a contractor in different parts of the world and parts of the country, and they were amazing. But looking at how we wanted to scale, and also looking at being compliant, because the laws around contractors, I think a lot of people don't know them, but there's a lot of stuff that you shouldn't be doing with your contractors, and you technically can't tell them. You can't really train them legally. You can't tell them when to work. So there's all this stuff that was really limiting our ability to scale, and scale with the quality of service that we were committed to delivering to our clients. So one of the biggest challenges was in 2017, and we still laugh about 2017 because it was very challenging, but we got rid of all of our contractors and hired local in-house employees. And that was a huge challenge. People told us that we were crazy. People thought we were insane because we were doing well with the other model. Interview Connections was growing with the contractor team, but we weren't able to grow the way and to the scale that we wanted. So we took a number of steps back in order to then later be able to sprint at the speed we wanted to be at and do what we wanted to do. But people told us we were crazy. It was very expensive with the benefits and the payroll, taxes, and all of that. And figuring out how to recruit and train and manage in-house employees was very different from managing remote contractors who technically you're not even managing anyway. You're like a client of theirs. So that was really challenging and ended up being worth it. We now have a team of 18 full-time employees, but getting from 2017 to where we are now took a lot.
Yeah, everyone sees the glory, but they don't know the story behind how someone had to get there. So on the flip side of that, what would you say, obviously you've been a part of this now. I mean, the company was created in 2013 and you came in after that. In the time that you've been there, what's been the most gratifying moment for you guys since you came into this and where Interview Connections is today?
It's very gratifying to be at a team of 18 full-time employees because the changeover to employees was so tricky in 2017. It's also so gratifying not just to have a team, but to really be developing leaders, because for so long it was just me and Jess overseeing the team and we were doing everything, and then we just kept adding more and more and more to our plate. So getting to the point where we have an incredible manager who is leading our booking agents and leaders within the pods of booking agents, that is incredibly gratifying, because leadership is a long-term process. It's taken a long time to get good at it, and we still have a lot further to go. But seeing these leaders below us really taking it on and really leading the business, and really seeing that the business isn't just ours anymore, there's all these other leaders who are part of it too, has been very gratifying.
I love the fact that your biggest obstacle was also your biggest triumph, because, sometimes in life, the biggest challenges also present the biggest victories, because you end up learning a lot about yourself when you get on the other side of that. No, people are very afraid to take risks and take chances and, put themselves out there in ways that they need to really have themselves leveraged in the right way. So as we start to wind down, there's one final question that I have before we sign off. But before we do that, if anyone is interested in learning about Interview Connections, or how they can see some of your content, or even how they can connect with you, what's the best way for people to do that?
The best way to connect with us is actually through our free Facebook community. Jess and I are active in there, so it's a live conversation. We have two amazing community managers who are there to support and answer questions. All of our best content is in that group. We're constantly doing live trainings. So you can get there by going to interviewconnections.com/group, and just make sure you answer the 3 required member questions.
Love that. And final question, Margy, before we sign off, there's no wrong answer, because this is obviously what it means to you. So what does success truly mean to you?
Success to me is definitely holistic. I don't think you can have just the money and truly be successful, but I also don't think without the money, I would consider myself successful. So it's that balance of financial abundance, good relationships, physical health and wellness, that spirituality aspect, and then also living in integrity, knowing that you are really living your truth, you're walking that walk. When you have all of those things in alignment, that is true success.
And I love that. And again, for the audience that's listening, all the information that Margy left will be in the show notes. And I highly, highly encourage you guys to join the free group. Start finding out a little bit more about podcasting, whether it's reaching out to Margy or reaching out to me, to really understand the full power and potential that it is, because there are thousands of people every single day that are launching podcasts. And there's also thousands of people every single day forgetting about the one that they started. And this is about just taking those daily steps to really create that success. And it's about consistency. So Margy, again, thank you so much for being here today, sharing your knowledge, all those golden nuggets and takeaways for my audience. And I just appreciate you so much. So thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott.
Absolutely. So guys, remember, head over to iTunes. If you're listening from there, leave a 5-star rating and review. Takeaways, tangibles, things to improve. Would love to hear from you guys. So please enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you so much again for checking out today's episode. And if you are listening through iTunes, Spotify, wherever you are, Please leave me a rating and review. Let me know what you loved, what you would like to see improved, or ideas you have for future episodes. And if you are interested in taking your business to the next level, don't hesitate to go to my website, www.scottaaron.net, where you can schedule a free discovery call with me, where I can learn more about you, your business, what you're struggling with, and how we can work together. And don't forget to check out my wife, Nancy, and mine, our free community on Facebook called LinkedIn Leads for Life. We would love to see you in there. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you, everyone, for your support. Grateful for each and every one of you.